Let's start, though, Mika, with the abrupt exit of Homeland Security Chief Kirstjen Nielsen.
Yeah, interesting. Late last night, Nielsen tweeted, "I have agreed to stay on as secretary through Wednesday, April 10th. That's
She gave
day
him,
after tomorrow.
She gave him a 2-day notice.
So that's not agreeing to staying on. That's leaving. So when you agree to stay on, it's 2 weeks, 2 months, 6 months. You're helping out with the transition. This is you're out of here or I'm out of here. I wonder which one it was. She says she's going to assist with an orderly transition in 2 days. And ensure that key DHS missions are not impacted. President Trump asked for her resignation at the White House on Sunday evening, just 48 hours after Nielsen joined him for a visit to the border. Officials told the Washington Post that a sign of discord came on Friday when the White House yanked the Senate nomination of a longtime federal immigration official, Ronald Vitiello, to lead Immigration and Customs Enforcement after senior White House advisor Stephen Miller lobbied Trump to cut him loose. On his way to the border Friday, Trump spoke about the decision to shake up his immigration enforcement team.
Mr. President, we're going in a little different direction. Ron's a good man, but we're going in a tougher direction. We want to go in a tougher direction.
So, Jonathan Lemire, just for everybody at home trying to figure this out, you hear about how harsh the president's border policies have been. You hear about how harsh Kirstjen Nielsen's border policies have been that she's been trying to enact for the president of the United States. Explain how well, the president says he could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and get away with it, and there, by all indications, he can. There is a greater concern for him, and that is having to run in 2020 with Democrats saying, you know what, Donald? When Barack Obama left office, border crossings were at a 50-year low. Since you've gotten in there, the only thing your harsh policies have done are stir up a panic, try to bring people across the border, and they've skyrocketed since you entered the office.
Now, what we've seen here is, let's remember the origin of this Department of Homeland Security. It was founded after 9/11, with its primary focus being terror threats. But it goes to show you, this move here, it shows you where the priorities are for this administration, and that's these border crossings. It's the idea of immigration. Now, the nature of these immigrants coming over the southern border has changed. It's fewer single men laborers, more families, and that's causing, more clogged conditions in the facilities in the border, to be sure. But this is also... This is the president. Let's keep this in mind. First of all, he and Kirstjen Nielsen never quite got along. He was always suspicious of her from the start. John Kelly was her rabbi in the White House. She has ties to the Bush family. He never felt like that she was quite tough enough. And in recent weeks and months, as the numbers have grown, and he's grown, of immigrants crossing have grown, he has grown considerably more frustrated. Stephen Miller, senior aide in the White House, his influence has only grown. Jared Kushner as well on the issue of immigration. They felt like Nielsen was moving too slow, including implementing the family separations order. They felt like that she wasn't projecting enough toughness, which was the same reason why, as you just played from that clip, the head of ICE is on his way out. He berated her in phone calls, blamed her in numbers, and wants to make this still the central issue that he runs on again for 2020. So this is at the forefront of his mind. She went into the White House last night with a resignation letter in hand, unsure if she was going to resign or be fired. She more or less was made to resign. And she leaves now with this. She oversaw the family separation policy, which prompted protests across the country and heartbreaking images of children in cages. And yet, at the end of the day, this administration felt like that policy was not extreme enough. That was not hard enough. And they're going to try to take it even further in the days and weeks ahead.
And that's what Donald Trump has said over the weekend. He keeps talking about a tougher and tougher policy, keeps saying repeatedly to nobody in particular, it's closed, we're closed, we have no more room. And Hans Nickel at the White House, this always was a contentious relationship. Donald Trump seemed to take pleasure in humiliating Kirstjen Nielsen, both publicly and privately in front of cabinet members. So how exactly did this go down?
Well, public humiliation from the president isn't necessarily a distinction. He's done that to many of his cabinet members. Look, what we know from Nielsen's side of things is that she was clearly frustrated with the president, but in a lot of ways, this is a personality difference. The president clearly frustrated with her as well. The policy differences that they had are more difficult to suss out, and that gives you an indication, as Jonathan's saying, is that the policy is going to be the same. If anything, it will be harsher. And her replacement, the acting, if the acting gets through, there's some technical and legal difficulties on whether or not Kevin McAlean can actually become acting Homeland Security. If he does become that person, he's in a similar position as Patrick Shanahan is over at Defense, and that is to say, entirely dependent on the president on a day-to-day basis to do the president's bidding for their job security. And that is a unique dynamic, but it's one that we should note the president really relishes. He loves having these actings because when he has an acting, he says jump, and they have to say how high.
Wow. President Trump spent most of the weekend trying to get a handle on his border policy. Saturday night, he tweeted, quote, "We have redeployed 750 agents at the southern border's specific ports of entry in order to help with the large-scale surge of illegal migrants trying to make their way into the United States." An apparent reference to those lawfully seeking asylum. Quote, "This will cause traffic and commercial delays." But the president seemed frustrated by beefing up resources at the ports, adding, "Until Mexico cleans up this ridiculous and massive migration, we will be focusing on border security, not ports of entry." In public appearances, he vented his desire to change the laws.
Now, Congress has to act. They have to get rid of catch and release, chain migration, visa lottery. They have to get rid of the whole asylum system because it doesn't work. And frankly, we should get rid of judges. You can't have a court case every time somebody steps their foot on our ground.
We've had some very bad court decisions. The Flores decision is a disaster, I have to tell you. Judge Flores, whoever you may be, that decision is a disaster for our country.
I know that doesn't sound like a wasp's name, Donald. Maybe that's why you talked about Judge Flores, but there is no Judge Flores. In fact, that decision you were talking about, Donald, that bars actually the federal government from detaining minors for more than 20 days, the settlement of that case, known as the Reno v. Flores case, that wasn't named after a judge that you're suspicious of. Because their last name wasn't Smith or Jones. It was named after Jenny Flores, a 15-year-old migrant from El Salvador.
My Lord.
And Jim VandeHei, comment on this politically. Again, the president concerned going into the election. He doesn't have a wall. Plus, he has all of these migrants coming up to the border and trying to cross the border. And, you know, on top of that, as far as his policies go, Democrats can attack his policies as well because he wants to defund aid going to the El Salvador and other countries that actually would do a better job of keeping those migrants at home.
Yeah, I mean, politically, he's calculating that immigration will be a winner again, right? You're not going to get a softer line. You're going to get someone running Homeland Security who takes a much harder line than someone who already had a pretty hard line. The president wants somebody who will really stretch what legal authority they actually have and really push to, I think, ultimately shut down the border. He tries to portray this as a crisis of historic proportion. It is definitely a problem. Even Obama administration officials say that we have a problem at the border. The problem is, it is a complicated one to solve because so many of the people that are coming here are coming from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. They're trying to seek asylum because they're fleeing like instability. They're fleeing gangs. They're fleeing like basically bad places to live. And so just beefing up security at the border won't necessarily fix that problem in the short term. The bigger problem, the thing people should pay attention to, is you now have this pattern where almost everybody leaves this White House bitter, and especially in these national security positions. And where that matters is it just makes it so much harder to find somebody who will then come in and be the Secretary of Defense, somebody who really wants to be a full-time chief of staff, someone who wants to come in and truly run the Department of Homeland Security, because in areas that the president cares about, he's going to intervene, and he's going to want you to do things that are above and beyond what current law and certainly current precedent might allow you to do. And that's a jam, because at some point, and we've been talking about this for some time, something bad will happen, and you really do want really good people in the right positions to make good decisions based on what is doable and what's not doable. And little by little, that's getting harder.
And of course, the number of acting secretaries, acting administration officials, boy, it just keeps growing. But you know, Jim, this is what's also got to be a great concern for Republicans politically is the president's now saying we're going to double down on this. This is going to be an issue for him in 2020. They pushed this issue in 2018. This was the centerpiece of Donald Trump's campaign, fear and loathing surrounding caravans, disease-ridden caravans coming to a neighborhood near you. And Republicans suffered the largest midterm loss ever. And the electorate only expands in 2020. This becomes an even more untenable political position to take as the electorate expands during a presidential election.
I tend to agree with that, and it certainly hurt. It hurt Republicans in the off-year election. I think healthcare was a much bigger deal if you look at all the exit polls. But Donald Trump, who feels like he has his finger on the pulse of sort of the white working class, those people who voted for him that we didn't think would vote for him in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and other places. Yeah. He really believes that this excites him. He really believes this is the most important political topic. If you look at the amount of tweets, the amount of time, amount of announcements that he allocates to immigration versus any other topic, this is clearly what consumes him and consumes his presidency. And he thinks it's now a test of his toughness. Can he shut down the border? Can he force Democrats to do what he wants to do? And he's had a string of losses, which only makes him more frustrated and wants people to do what he wants done now. And she didn't do that. She resigned.
Good Lord. So, Amna, I know you've been talking to your sources about this. Not tough enough? Like, what is the legacy of Kirstjen Nielsen, and what policies should we be looking forward to seeing the president pushing, given the fact that she wasn't tough enough?
Yeah, Mika, we've heard some of it already, right? I mean, the fact that she wasn't tough enough is it's difficult for a lot of people to swallow. We talk a lot about family separation. That was obviously one of the policies that gets the most attention just because of the sheer cruelty, the sheer vastness of it that we still don't know. But let's not forget, it was on her watch, too, that tear gas was fired across the border at San Ysidro into a group of migrants. It was on her watch that this migrant protection protocol was rolled out, which basically keeps asylum seekers in Mexico, not allowing them into the U.S. while their cases unfold. And if Kevin McAleenan, the CBP head who the president wants to be her replacement, if he does step in, this is a guy who has signaled he is willing to be tougher. Let's not forget, he held a press conference in El Paso with, as a backdrop, a group of families and children behind razor wire under a bridge where they slept on rocks that night. So if that wasn't a signal, I'm not sure what is. But just one more thing to Jim's point earlier about something bad happening. Let's also not forget something bad has already happened. As a result of all of these policies, 2 migrant children died in U.S. government custody over the last several months. And there's obviously a lot of concern something like that could happen again.
Yeah, that's her legacy. I mean, I don't know how else to put it, Joe. Right. This is, you know, it doesn't sound like we completely understand the nature of her departure. She might have been fed up. I can only hope that. But she didn't seem fit for the job. She didn't seem like she was able to articulate the policies well. She always seemed like she had her back up and got caught in these ridiculous sound bites where she was trying to explain what a cage wasn't. This is, again, the taint of Trump, where you leave with a horrific legacy. I don't know how many more cabinet secretaries can handle this.
Well, you think they would look and see. It seemed from the beginning, Donald Trump didn't trust her because she knew General Kelly well. Donald Trump didn't trust her because she had worked for George W. Bush, a Republican who had always been very forward-looking as it pertained to legal immigration and handling immigrants and handling migrants. George W. Bush, after all, got 46% of the Hispanic vote in the 2004 election. He was positively progressive compared to most Republicans in this area, and that's who she worked for before. And it is, Mika, it is just more evidence that no matter what you do for this man, no matter how much you humiliate yourself, you're still going to leave with him angry at you, blaming you, and with your reputation in tatters. But Tom, we don't have to just talk about Tom Nichols. We don't have to just talk about Kirstjen Nielsen as it pertains to this. We can talk about the entire Republican Party. The Republican Party, that again, of George W. Bush, was forward-looking when it came to immigration. President Bush tried to pass comprehensive immigration reform. We could talk about Ronald Reagan's last address to America, talking about the promise of immigration, the greatness of America, and when the Statue of Liberty stopped opening her arms to the rest of the world, well, then America's greatness would recede. That was our Republican Party when we were members of the Republican Party. Something very, very different now. And again, I want to underline this again, Tom. They tried this nonsense, this hatred, this demagoguery in 2018, and the results were absolutely disastrous in a midterm election. Just how bad will this go for Donald Trump in 2020 if he is both harsh and extraordinarily impotent when it comes to handling his own borders?
Well, the president's always counting on shoring up that 30 to 35% of the base, and I think the goal is always to squeeze every last vote out of the angriest members of that base. He's not trying to broaden it. He's just trying to, get the very last votes. And with this attack on Judge Flores, can an attack on Judge Miranda, Judge Escobedo, be far behind? But the other thing that's a problem here, and this is where Republicans, I think, end up throwing up their hands because they can't talk to the president or negotiate with him. This is what happens when you have a president who doesn't know how things work. And I don't mean how things are traditionally done. I mean, literally does not understand how the levers of government work. So it's really interesting through this whole discussion all morning where we're talking about, well, the president wants somebody who's going to be tougher. And no one knows what that means. So, well, I want you to be tougher. I want you to do something different. If, as we've all said this morning, if putting children in cages and separating from their families isn't tough enough, then, what does that mean? And I think it's because the president just doesn't understand how any of this gets done on a daily basis.
Right, and also this move comes against the backdrop of a national emergency, which was the president declared over the opposition of members of his own party. Let's remember, there was a veto that had to be done here. This was not something he had universal support. So, Joe, to your point, in some ways, this isolates him further on this issue. Yes, he is betting big that this worked for him in 2016. It can again in 2020, but it could further splinter, a Republican Party that, as popular as he is among the base, there are reservations on Capitol Hill about what he's done and how he's handling immigration.
This helps him, Mika, in the red states. This is not going to help him where he needs to expand his electorate. They're trying to expand the map, and right now he's got a 32% reelect in Wisconsin, playing this card for 3 years. He's got a 32% reelect in Michigan, playing this card. His numbers have plummeted in Florida, playing this card. His numbers have plummeted in Pennsylvania, playing this card. He lost more members of his own party than any Republican president since Richard Nixon was driven from office in Watergate, months after Watergate. This, let me say it slowly for Donald, this is a losing issue. You have your 35%, Donald. This is a losing issue.
Well, and forget the politics of it. This is one of the sickest things about this presidency. Hans Nichols at the White House. What are you looking at today as you continue to cover this story and the dynamics around it?
I'm looking to see whether or not her departure date gets accelerated, whether or not if the president looks at her comments and what allies of hers are saying, and whether or not we have a situation similar to Mattis where he was supposed to stay on for 2 months and then all of a sudden he was out by the close of business once the president figured out how critical Mattis actually was to the president. You know, Joe, just to the numbers point, I was with the president down there on the border. I was with him in Las Vegas. The president doesn't believe those numbers. He believes his gut. And when he talked to, say, the Jewish Republican Coalition in Las Vegas, what he always goes back to is the midterm elections in Ohio and Florida. He somehow feels, intuits, choose your verb. He insists that he's winning with his base, and that's why he continues to press this, because he looks at 2018, the midterm elections, and he sees a resounding endorsement of Trump's policies, specifically on the border. Yeah, he lost a bunch of seats in the suburbs, but I don't really think he's losing a lot of sleep over that. He's looking at this race on a state by state, not a county by county, and he's certainly not looking at it as an opportunity to bring the country together and have some sort of working agenda after he gets reelected. He simply wants to get past that election date. And when you look at his rhetoric, it's really designed to talk to that base. And he just thinks it's much bigger than we do. And that's really what this election is going to come down to, is whether or not Donald Trump's gut is right or whether or not the facts are right. Guys?
Well, if you move Ohio and Florida to the side, Donald Trump has to win Wisconsin. He's got to win Michigan. He's got to win Pennsylvania. And this doesn't look like this is driving numbers in any direction that is meaningful for him. But we'll see. That's good insight from NBC's Hans Nichols.
Thank you,
so
Hans.
much, Hans.
Just, if there's anything amusing out of this horrific policy and this horrible story, it's the Homeland Security Secretary. I think it's a veiled jab. I have agreed to stay on till tomorrow. She's so out of there. She's done. I mean, I don't know how else you can read that. Usually people agree to stay on for a transition. She's out the door. It's ours.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.